we're going to make one of my favorite recipes. It's a vegetable souffle. And the vegetables involved are three of my favorite vegetables. We're going to be using zucchini. We're going to use mushrooms. And, of course, onions. So let's get our preheated pot ready. And get some oil in there to heat it up. We're going to use enough canola oil just to cover the bottom of the pan. If you're really health conscious and you don't want to use any oil, you can also use a spray of some sort of cooking spray, preferably maybe even like a par of butter flavor would add a nice flavor to it. And we're going to let the oil heat on the side a little bit. And in the meantime, we're going to cut up this zucchini. Now this recipe calls for 2 to 3 regular zucchinis, but we seem to have had an abundance of zucchini here, and this is quite a large one. So this would be would estimate to be equal to 2 to 3 zucchinis. If you use an extra zucchini, I have no problem with that. The more zucchini, the better. You know, zucchini is an interesting vegetable. Zucchini is very high in folate, potassium, and vitamin A. And the best part about zucchini is a little known fact that 19% of the average zucchini is very high in manganese, which gets the body's enzymes working for fat burning and metabolism. So for those of you on diets, zucchini isn't just low in fat, it also gets those fat burning enzymes working. Okay, so I'm going to cut these up. See here, I'm using this Sentoku knife again, and I'm slicing zucchini because it's so big. I'm slicing it in half one way, and then I'm going to make half rounds this way, so that each piece is about 1/4 of an inch thick and like a half a circle. Don't make yourself crazy that it should be a specific length or width, because everything will average out in the end. Just slicing up this zucchini. To the side. I think our oil is hot here, so we want to get some of the vegetables in. So we're going to put the onions in now, because onions take a little bit longer to cook. We're going to let those heat up a little bit. You want the onions to saute till they're translucent, not brown too much. There's nothing like the smell of onions sauteing in the kitchen. You don't have dinner ready, but you have some onions going on. It seems like you know you have control of what's going on in the kitchen. And we're going to get about half a pack of mushrooms. Now these are baby portobellos, also known as cremini mushrooms. But you can use button mushrooms. If you really want to save time, you can use the pre-sliced mushrooms. You can get a pack of those in the supermarket. What I love about mushrooms is, even though they're very, very delicate and they get brown very quickly, I always have the leftover mushrooms that I'm not using for my recipe already sliced up in the freezer. So if I'm short on time, all I do is grab some mushrooms from the freezer, and they cook up beautifully with the oil. Okay, so we have our onions and we have our zucchini, and we're going to throw everything in here to start mixing with. The color of this recipe is also very nice. We have the green zucchini, and these baby portobellos have a nice brown shade to them. If you want, you can also substitute green zucchini for yellow zucchini. If you want to be really fancy, use a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and it is a vegetable souffle, so sometimes you'll have like extra things in the freezer and you want to just throw them into this vegetable souffle. You can use some red peppers, you can use some broccoli, some cauliflower. Saute up whatever vegetables you want. All right, here we go. Now I'm using a silicone spatula, which can really withstand heat of up to 500 degrees. We're going to let our vegetables saute here for a little bit and cover them up so that they can soften properly. I literally make this recipe every week. It's just so delicious. It has all the components you need. It has eggs in it, which gives you your protein. It has a little bit of fat, healthy fat, using a canola oil. It has your vegetables. And of course, it has some flour, so you have the carbohydrates. So it's really all the food groups in one recipe. And it's beautiful to serve. And it can be made in so many different ways. You can make it in a large pan. You can make it in a small cupcake pan. So there's a lot of different choices to make with this. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for that to saute, I think I'm going to check my eggs. Now we know that eggs sometimes have blood spots on them, so you want to be careful that there aren't any. We don't crack all the eggs into the same container. Otherwise, if one has a blood spot, the rest of the eggs have to be thrown out. So we're going to crack each egg individually. I'm going to take my eggs out. Room temperature really is the best way to have them. And check the top and the bottom. It's good to use a clear container for this. No blood spots. No blood spots, 2 for 2. We did well, 3 eggs and 0 blood spots. Okay. What I like to do the eggs ahead of time is because the mixture is so hot. I'm going to raise the temperature here so this cooks a little faster. Because the mixture is so hot and eggs cook so quickly, once the egg hits the heated mixture, it tends to cook right away. And then you'll have like pieces of egg curdling onto your mixture for the souffle, and that will not be good. So if we mix them ahead of time, and we're going to add them in, believe it or not, last in the recipe, once we have enough of other ingredients to cool down the pot, that will be the best choice. Okay? While we're still waiting for our zucchini to cook, I have to wash this off because it does have the eggs on it. We have flour in this recipe that also calls for flour. I find that as much of the recipe you can have prepared ahead of time will make things go that much faster. And we don't really have so much time in the kitchen all the time. So if we can consolidate all the like ingredients, it'll make everything move much more quickly. This bowl contains 2/3 of a cup of flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, and a teaspoon of salt. Also can use a nice shake of freshly ground pepper. I would do 1 turn of it. Not too much because it really is a very intense spice, believe it or not. And especially when it's coming from the peppercorns that are fresh, the flavor is that much more intense. And we don't want to overpower the vegetable souffle with too much. I'm going to mix them all together. Because we need that baking powder also to be distributed evenly amongst all the flour, it's always a good idea to first mix it in with the flour and the salt. You're also going to taste this. You know, some people are at a low salt diet. This is a great recipe because there's so much flavor going on from the vegetables and the zucchini and even the pepper that you can even leave out the salt. Okay, letting the zucchini is still sauteing. Okay, so let's check the zucchini now. Okay, it looks beautiful. You don't want the zucchini to be too well done, too cooked through. You want it to be a little more translucent than it started with. It was like more white at the beginning, and now it kind of has a translucent tinge to it. The vegetables also, the mushrooms are a little bit softer, the onions are translucent, and this is perfect. I'm going to remove it from the flame. And zucchini also is a very water-based vegetable, so it's going to have some water at the end of it after sauteing and evaporating and the condensing that goes on in the pot. So don't worry about that liquid. We have an answer for that. I'm going to put away my spatula, and I'm going to use a harder spoon because I'm going to need some of the force of the spoon. And I'm going to start with my flour mixture and baking powder and salt and pepper. The reason I'm doing this is to get rid of some of the liquid. The flour will absorb the liquid up. Okay, so I'm going to mix that in to coat all the vegetables with flour. Nice and coated. Okay. You'll have a little bit of extra flour. It's not going to be totally used up by the vegetables. Now I'm going to add 1/2 cup of water, nicely pre-measured by my staff here. And the reason for the water is it also helps activate the baking powder in the recipe. It needs that water. And also I find the water is great when you use cold water. Since this zucchini has been sitting on the fire for so long, I want to cool things down as much as possible so that when I add the eggs, they don't curdle. So here we go with the flour and the water. Almost like paste looking, but that's okay. It should look pasty. Don't get concerned like, what's happening with my souffle? It's supposed to look that way. Okay. The next ingredient that I'm going to add into it, I'm going to get my silicone spatula, is 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. We have that delicious mayonnaise. Fat-free, low-fat, any fat mayonnaise. Gives it a really nice creamy taste to it. And you'd be surprised how much flavor comes from the actual recipe from the mayonnaise, because the mayonnaise has its own ingredients and spices inside. That's why we only really added a teaspoon of salt and a twist of the black pepper, because it has its own recipe in the mayonnaise that's going to flavor our zucchini. The final ingredient is going to be the eggs. Now, like I said before, when you're adding the eggs, you check them and put them all in one bowl, or you can add them one at a time. If you're going to add them one at a time, make sure to mix them very thoroughly in between, because otherwise the eggs will begin to curdle. I like to do everything in one shot and then mix like crazy. So here are my eggs, and I'm going to quickly mix them into my mixture. Now we have our mixture. We're going to use an oven to tableware. You can use a 9-inch pan, you can use an 8-inch pan. The difference will be you might want to cook it a little bit longer if it's a thinner pan. You can also use a pie dish, a pre-baked pie crust, and then pour this inside. Okay. If you want to make it really pretty, you can take some of the whole pieces of zucchini and put those on top to make almost like a design. You don't have many of them in this case because they cook so nicely through, but you want to evenly distribute the zucchini and the mushrooms on top. Now we're ready to bake. Taking our pan. So we're going to place our vegetable souffle in the oven. So we're going to put it on 350 for about an hour. You want to check on this souffle every 45 minutes, depending on the temperature of your oven. Everyone's oven has a different temperature. And there you go. Delicious vegetable souffle. Enjoy!